the heart of eternal winter lived a king who had never known an embrace. Until one day, she stepped into his frozen world, soft as spring wind, warm as a memory never lived. They touched only for a moment, but that moment melted an entire kingdom. This is not an ordinary fairy tale. It's a gentle song between frost and bloom, between someone who never learned how to love and someone brave enough to love, then let go. Welcome to Evermore, where spring once touched the heart of winter. In the farthest corner of the northern sky, where stars sleep longer and the wind forgets its name, there stood a kingdom carved from silence. No bells ever rang, no birds sang, only snow whispered. There, wrapped in frost and fading echoes, lived a king no one truly knew. His name was Oren. Oren was not a king of subjects, nor armies, nor conquest. He was the keeper of stillness, the sovereign of winter's breath. His castle, woven from ice and sculpted by time, rose like a phantom from the spine of the glacier. No fire had ever burned in its hearth. No footsteps but his echoed through the halls. And though he ruled over snow and wind, Oren had reigned alone for more winters than stars could count. He wasn't cruel, nor was he wicked. He was simply quiet. Oren spent his days crafting beauty that no eyes ever saw. He etched frost patterns on the window's spirals, so delicate they danced like constellations. He shaped snowflakes so intricate that each seemed like a secret. Sometimes he would sit for hours, unmoving, just listening to the hush between gusts of wind. He told himself it was enough, but the silence, once comforting, had grown heavier with each passing year. Like a velvet cloak turned to stone. The wind, once his companion, had grown distant. The stars, once near, now blinked coldly from afar. There was a weight in Oren's chest, one he couldn't melt, couldn't sculpt, couldn't name. Every morning, he opened the tallest window in the eastern tower. It faced a world frozen in stillness, forests stiff with ice rivers sleeping beneath crystal lids, and skies the color of silver sorrow. He stood there, wrapped in furs and mist, searching for something he couldn't describe. A sound, a shimmer, a sign, but nothing ever came. No one ever came. Long ago, travelers had tried to reach his kingdom. Some came with fire, some with song, some with steel. All failed. Not because Oren turned them away, but because his land rejected warmth. It swallowed flame. It silenced music. It shattered swords. And so he remained untouched, unseen, unknowable. Still deep inside, a question lived. a quiet flame behind frozen ribs. What would it feel like to be seen? On lonely evenings, he walked the memory hall, a corridor lined with ice mirrors. Each reflection didn't show his face, but moments long lost. A snow fox once curled beside his throne. A comet once paused above his tower. A dream of warmth that never came to pass. In one mirror, he saw a garden long vanished where something had once tried to bloom. He often paused there. Oren didn't remember planting anything. Yet the mirror always showed it. A single white blossom, half frozen, reaching toward light. He never touched the mirror. He feared even that image might crack if he did. He was not cursed. No spell held him. But neither could he leave. His kingdom needed him, like the moon needs the dark. If he abandoned the cold, the balance would break. So he stayed, even as loneliness wrapped around his heart like mist. And though his face bore the calm of eternal winter, there were nights he stood beside the frozen lake, speaking to the stars. "Is there more than this?" he asked them softly. The stars never answered. But one night, as frost crept silently across the windows, the wind returned, not with its usual sigh, but with a whisper he hadn't heard in ages. A sound soft and warm, threading through the cold, like the memory of touch. It carried a faint scent earth after rain blossoms unfurling sunlight on skin. Oren turned sharply. His heart stirred, startled by its own flutter. That wind did not belong to winter. It belonged to something else, something new, and for the first time in countless seasons, the Winter King did not feel alone in the silence. He didn't know what was coming, only that something was, and it was moving toward him, not with fire, not with steel, not with song, but with something far more dangerous: hope, far beyond Oren's silent dominion, where rivers danced freely and meadows swayed in songs of color, lived a young woman named Lyanna. She was the breath between blossoms, the pause before petals opened, the warmth in the soil before roots awoke. Where she walked, wildflowers rose in reverence. Where she sang, rain bowed gently from the clouds. But even in a land of abundance, Lyanna felt something missing. Everyone adored her joy. They celebrated her beauty, her grace, her bloom. But no one truly stayed. To them, she was spring, an arrival, not a companion. A miracle that must always move on. Each year she returned, and each year she was loved only until the next. Never more. She smiled for them, but her heart longed for stillness, for someone who wouldn't chase her light, but meet her shadow. Someone who didn't fear when the flowers wilted. Someone who would remember her not for what she brought, but for who she was. One twilight, as she wandered alone through a misted orchard, a strange breeze brushed her cheek. It wasn't warm like her winds. It was crisp, thin, tinged with longing. A whisper threaded through it, soft as breath on glass. She paused, eyes closing. This wind carried ache and memory and something else, something pure, curious. Liana turned to face the north. She had never ventured far in that direction. Her realm knew where spring must go. But this wind pulled gently yet firmly, not demanding, but inviting. A call without words, a sadness wrapped in silver. She didn't tell anyone. She simply followed. She crossed lavender fields and silverwood forests, climbed cliffs where the sun lingered longest, past rivers reluctant to freeze. The sky grew paler, the earth quieter. The green gave way to gray, and still she moved forward, feet light, breath steady, heart listening. The further north she traveled, the fewer creatures she met. Birds stopped singing. Trees stood still. Until one morning, snow fell like silence all around her. The world hushed, and before her, rising like a sigh held too long, stood a castle of ice. It shimmered beneath the dawn, untouched by warmth, towering, elegant, and utterly alone. Liana took a breath. She stepped closer. The snow didn't bite her. The frost didn't chase her away. It watched her, curious. The wind swirled around her, gently testing her scent, then carrying it upward. Oren felt it instantly. He stood in the eastern tower, where he always watched. But this time, his heart raced. Something had changed. The silence no longer sat beside him. It had moved outside. He looked down, and there, standing at the edge of his world, was someone. She was wrapped in a cloak the color of first light. Her hair danced like sunbeams through mist. Her cheeks, flushed from wind, curved in a soft smile. As she lifted her face to the tower, she waved. Oren blinked. No one had ever waved at him before. He hesitated, then vanished from the window. Moments later, the great gates groaned open, something they hadn't done in ages. Liana didn't flinch. She waited, hands clasped calmly. When Oren emerged, cloaked in silver and shadow, the snowflakes held their breath. Their eyes met, no words yet. Just a long, quiet look, like the meeting of two old melodies, once lost, now found again. Liana stepped forward, removing her glove. The cold kissed her skin, but she didn't shiver. Instead, she offered her hand. Oren stared at it. No one had offered him a hand in centuries. He reached out slowly. Their palms touched. The snow beneath them shifted ever so slightly. And from somewhere deep in the ice, something exhaled. Liana smiled. "I heard your silence," she said softly. "And I wondered who lived inside it. Her voice was warm, but not loud, gentle enough to enter without breaking anything. Oren didn't know what to say, so he nodded. He turned and slowly led her through the courtyard. The frost beneath their feet sparkled with strange joy. She walked beside him without fear. Her gaze touched every sculpture, every frozen spire, not with pity, but with wonder. Inside the castle glistened like a frozen lullaby. Walls of ice held mirrors of stars. Chandeliers of crystal hummed with stillness. Liana moved with grace, hands trailing along the railings, eyes wide with quiet awe. "This place," she whispered, "feels like a breath someone forgot to exhale." Oren's lips curved almost a smile. He showed her the Hall of Frozen Winds, the Chamber of Echoed Snow, the staircase that led nowhere but stars. Liana touched nothing. She only listened. And Oren, for the first time in ages, spoke not of weather or duty, but of dreams. Each word thawed something in him. Each look from her lit something long buried. That night, Liana stayed, just for a while. And Oren, who had never needed a fire, found himself standing closer to her warmth than he ever thought he'd allow. Outside, the wind whispered to the snow, "She has arrived," and the silence at last was no longer alone. The next morning, snow fell gently from a cloudless sky, not in sharp flurries, but in soft spirals, like feathers drifting from a dream. Inside the palace of ice, a warmth had settled, not one that melted walls, but one that lingered in the spaces between words. Oren stood in the corridor of frozen light, staring at the frost patterns on the windows. For centuries, they had been his creation, meticulous, silent, symmetrical. But today, they shimmered differently. There was a softness to their edges, a suggestion of change. Behind him, footsteps approached, not echoing, not cautious, just present. Liana. She moved like sunlight slipping through mist, quiet but undeniable. In her presence, time didn't rush. It breathed. "You rise early," she said, standing beside him. "I never slept," he replied. Her eyes met his steady. And now he didn't answer. He didn't need to. Together, they looked out through the frost-stained glass. Beyond the towering gates, the snow-covered garden lay silent, but not empty. In one small patch where Liana had touched the ground the day before, a delicate vine curled upward, impossibly green. Oren blinked. "That shouldn't be." Liana smiled. "Neither should I, perhaps." He turned to her fully. "You're fading, aren't you?" She hesitated just a moment. "A little. This realm is not made for breath like mine. But I am still here." He stepped closer, and the cold between them dared to retreat. "Why did you come?" I heard a silence. She said that felt too deep to be empty. That sentence touched something in him, something old and aching. Oren led her to the inner sanctum, the place no one had ever entered, the heart of his kingdom. It was a circular chamber, tall as a cathedral, with walls that glowed like frozen moonlight. At its center stood a tree, or rather, the memory of one. Bare branches carved from crystal, roots imprisoned in frost, a symbol of something that had once tried to grow. Liana gasped softly. "She's beautiful." Oren watched her carefully. "You see beauty in her still? She hasn't given up?" Liana whispered. "She's just waiting." They sat together beneath the frozen boughs. Oren, who had always spoken to mirrors, now spoke aloud. He told her of the first storm he summoned, of the stars he carved from snow, of the dream he once had of hands reaching toward him and never quite touching. And Liana, in return, spoke of meadows that bloomed without asking, of winds that changed direction just to follow a song, of the ache of being adored by many, but known by none. It was the first time either had spoken without armor. Outside, the frost began to crack, not loudly, not dangerously, just small, delicate sounds, like glass stretching in morning light. Later that day, Liana wandered alone through the halls, touching nothing but leaving change in her wake. Icicles hummed as she passed. Long dead echoes stirred. In the chamber of sleeping stars, she found a mirror. Oren had warned her of these. They didn't show faces, only moments. She stepped in front of one. It shimmered, then cleared. She saw herself laughing beside a frozen lake. Oren's eyes softer than moonlight, her fingers intertwined with his. A future, a memory, a possibility. She touched the glass. It stayed whole. Behind her, Oren appeared. "You found the memory hall." She turned. "Do they lie? They reflect only what's hidden," he said. "Sometimes that's truth. Sometimes longing." She looked back at the mirror. "Then I suppose it's both." Oren walked to her slowly. "Your glow is dimming. I know. You should return." "I will. But not yet." He nodded, though everything in him wanted to say no. To ask her to stay. To beg the cold to allow the impossible. Instead, he offered her his hand, and when she took it, a single flake of snow melted. They returned to the great hall together. The chandeliers above sparkled with a softer light. The walls did not weep. They watched. That night, Liana sang just a single note, a lullaby quiet and aching. The wind carried it through every corridor, every chamber, every crack in the castle. And Oren, for the first time in 1,000 winters, closed his eyes and slept. The days that followed moved gently, as if the castle itself had slowed time to hold on to something it knew would pass. The wind no longer rushed. It drifted, hushed. The walls no longer echoed. They listened. And at the center of it all were Auron and Lyanna, two souls from different seasons, learning how to share the same breath. They spent long hours walking through the endless halls. Auron showed her the archives of frozen music, where sound was stored in crystal orbs that glowed when touched. Lyanna listened to a snowfall from 300 years ago. Then she listened to a silence, a sound Auron said was once the most beautiful of all. They wandered through chambers of light trapped in glass, through spiral staircases that led nowhere but beauty. Auron, who had always moved like mist, now walked with purpose, with presence, and Lyanna, though fading at the edges, glowed brighter in his eyes. She never tried to melt his world. She simply breathed into it, touched it lightly, and in return, it softened around her. The ice beneath her feet no longer cracked. It curved. The wind that once tested her now danced with her scarf. The vines she had brought unknowingly on her cloak began to pulse, gently clinging to pillars without harming them. They spoke of strange things, of how snow carries memory, of how warmth is not the enemy of stillness, but its complement. And Auron, who once feared questions, found himself asking many. Do flowers miss the frost when they bloom? Sometimes, Lyanna answered. It teaches them patience. He asked her once if she could stay. He didn't ask like a ruler. He asked like a man who had known hunger, but never tasted honey. Lyanna looked at him, pain hidden behind her smile. I cannot live in a place where my soul begins to dim. Auron looked away. But you came anyway? She nodded. Because my heart brightened. They sat beneath the frozen tree again. Its limbs seemed to shimmer more now. One small bud had formed at the tip of a branch. Neither of them said anything. They simply stared at it, as if afraid that naming it would break the spell. But as days passed, the truth grew harder to ignore. Lyanna was fading. Her skin, once kissed by gold, grew pale. Her laughter, once effortless, came slower. Her eyes, though still bright, blinked longer, as if each glance required more strength. Auron tried to hide the fear tightening in his chest. He offered her cloaks spun from mist elixirs, from mountain, frost lullabies, written in wind. But nothing helped. Spring does not live in winter. And she was spring in every breath. Still she stayed. Every day she stayed. She taught him how to find warmth even in cold, how to feel without burning, how to hold someone without breaking them, and he gave her quiet in return. A place to rest, to simply exist without being expected to bloom. They made no promises. They counted no days. But one night, as the stars turned above the glassy dome, Lyanna stood at the balcony. Her hair was loose, the color of sunrise in fog. Oren joined her, saying nothing. She placed her hand over his gently. "It's almost time." His throat tightened. "Is there no way to stay? If I stay, I won't be me." Oren looked down at the snow-covered courtyard. The spot where her first footprint had melted still shimmered. "I never wanted to be the reason something faded," he whispered. "You're not," she said. "You're the reason I dared to arrive." He turned to her fully. "Will you remember me?" Her smile trembled. "There are things the heart remembers, even when time forgets." He placed his forehead to hers. Their breath mingled not in heat, but in harmony. And for that moment, they didn't belong to any season. They belonged only to each other. Later that night, while Oren slept in a room that once rejected dreams, Liana wrote a letter. She placed it in a hollow of the crystal tree. And then with dawn just beginning to paint the sky in pale gold, she stepped outside. The wind rose to meet her, not to push her away, but to carry her home. By the time Oren awoke, she was gone. Only the echo of her steps remained. But in the courtyard where her footprints had once shimmered, something new grew. A sprig of green nestled in snow. Alive, unafraid, Oren stood in the courtyard long after the sun had risen. The snow beneath his boots was undisturbed, except for a single trail, the delicate path Liana had taken through his world. Her footprints, already fading, shimmered briefly before being swallowed by the hush. He didn't call after her. He didn't chase. To do so would have broken everything they had shared. But in his chest, something unfamiliar tightened. Not the ache of loneliness. He knew that well. This was different. A slow burning grief wrapped in the glow of gratitude. It was the weight of having known joy, even if only for a moment. He stepped toward the tree. The once frozen branches now bore something miraculous, a single bloom, tiny, white, alive. And there, nestled in the hollow of the trunk, he found her letter. A curl of parchment tied with green ribbon, still warm from the memory of her hands. With trembling fingers, Oren unfolded it. To the king who listened, even when silence was all he had. Thank you for letting me stay. Thank you for not asking me to stay longer. I am leaving, but I am not gone. I will return with the wind when the earth turns toward spring again. And when you feel that breeze, soft, warm, unexpected, know it is me. And if your heart still remembers me, come meet me halfway. Liana. He closed his eyes, pressing the letter to his chest. The wind stirred gentle against his face. It felt like her goodbye. That day, Oren did not wander the halls. He stayed in the courtyard beside the bloom, guarding it with quiet reverence. The snow around it did not melt entirely, but it softened, forming a cradle of frost rather than a tomb. At night, he lit no lanterns. He needed no light. Her memory glowed from within. The next morning, the sky changed. Clouds thinned. The light softened. And far in the distance, beyond the reach of the tallest tower, the edge of the sky hinted at blue. The kingdom was changing, slowly, subtly, but undeniably. Oren spoke to the frost, to the tree, to the bloom that pulsed softly beneath moonlight. "I will wait," he whispered, "not as a prisoner, but as a keeper." He opened windows that had been sealed for centuries. He invited wind to roam freely again. He polished the crystal orbs in the music chamber so that Liana's voice would echo sweeter each time he remembered her songs. And he wrote poems, letters, not to send, but to hold, words shaped from longing, from hope, from the new understanding of what it meant to be touched without being broken. When the first thunderstorm rolled across the southern horizon, he stood at the balcony. Rain never reached this far north, but he watched it anyway, imagining her running through it, barefoot, laughing arms wide. The tree grew slowly, not taller, but deeper. Its roots spread through the ice, gently cracking what had never cracked before. Not with violence, but with grace. Each new bud that appeared seemed to hum with her voice. The kingdom remained cold, but no longer empty. Even the wind seemed changed, no longer carrying sorrow alone, but memory, warmth, promise. And then one night, just before dawn, Oren felt it. A breeze unlike any other. It curled beneath the doors, tapped gently on the windows. It didn't chill. It stirred. It whispered through the halls, carrying the scent of something sweet and unseen. Jasmine, rain, Liana. Oren rose from his long vigil. He did not ask questions. He did not prepare. He simply walked past the garden of echoes, past the chamber of stars, past every place she had smiled. And when he stepped into the courtyard, he knew she was coming. Not in that moment. Not yet. But soon. The wind was her message. A whisper sewn into snow. She remembers. And he would meet her just as she had asked. Halfway, the days returned to their rhythm. Quiet, white measured, but the silence was different now. It no longer swallowed sound. It carried memory. The castle breathed more slowly, as though savoring the stillness left behind. Oren spent each morning beside the tree. He never named it, though he could have called it hers. It grew in the center of the courtyard, where winter had once ruled without mercy. Now it stood as a quiet rebellion, a tree that bloomed not in defiance of frost, but alongside it. Its bark shimmered like polished pearl. Its roots curved deep beneath the snow, tracing through centuries of ice. From one of its branches hung the first bloom Liana had left behind, still untouched, still whole. Each morning, Oren would touch the petals gently, just once, not to test it, not to guard it, but to remember it was real. Sometimes he spoke to the tree. Sometimes he simply saw. And every day, the castle seemed to change just a little more. The walls no longer held frost in anger. They shimmered like calm seas. The great hall's ceiling, once streaked in icicles, now mirrored the sky above. Oren had not willed these changes. He had only welcomed them. He moved through the chambers differently now, not as a keeper of cold, but as a companion to it. He cleaned the memory mirrors and left them uncovered. He restored the music orbs and let them hum freely when touched by wind. He began to write again, not out of loneliness, but love. His letters were quiet things, letters to no one, and to only one. He stored them in a glass box beneath the tree. When he walked through the corridors, he found traces of her. Not physically, not in scent or sound, but in presence. A flicker of gold on a stairwell, a gust of air that felt round, not sharp, a warmth behind his shoulder when he looked at the vine curling up a frost pillar. She had left. But not everything had left with her. The kingdom had remembered her, and so had he. One night, as stars pulsed like slow dancing fireflies, Oren lit a lantern from ice and hung it on the lowest branch of the tree. It gave no heat, but it glowed. A soft, steady light. Not to guide her home, he thought, but to let her know she was never forgotten. He wondered what her world looked like now. Had she returned to the fields and forests? Were there people calling her name? Did she speak of him? Did she dream of their shared quiet? He never asked the wind for answers. He only listened, and the wind, in turn, never gave promises, only patterns. A breeze that came warmer, a snowflake shaped more like a petal, a melody on the edge of a storm, all small, subtle signs, and still he waited, not with impatience, but with devotion. Seasons in his realm were not like the rest of the world. Time bent slower here. Spring came only when invited. He did not know when she would return, only that she would. Each evening, before retreating into the tower, he would stand beneath the tree and speak aloud. Just a sentence, one thought, one truth. He never wrote them down. He didn't need to. The tree, he believed, remembered them. One night, he whispered, "You taught me how to be alone without being lost." Another, "The silence misses you when you're not here." Another, "Some days I feel like I'm melting, but it doesn't scare me anymore." The tree never answered, but each time another petal formed. By the end of the first full moon cycle, 3 blossoms glowed on the branches, each one bright, each one still. One morning, a bird appeared, small, feathered in gray and ivory, resting on the uppermost limb. It did not sing. It only looked at Oren, then flew away. He took it as a greeting, maybe even a reminder, that things were stirring far beyond what the frost could see, that even in the coldest corners, the world was shifting, and soon someone might return to see it all. He added another lantern to the tree, and then a third. The courtyard became a circle of light, a place not just for waiting, but for hope. The morning it happened, began like all others, quiet, silver, slow. Oren stood beside the waiting tree, as he always did, tracing the edge of the newest bloom with a single gloved finger. Snow drifted softly through the courtyard, though the air no longer bit the skin. The cold had learned stillness, not sharpness. He had whispered his thought to the tree that morning, as he always did. Even if you never return, you changed everything. But as he turned to leave, the wind shifted, not in direction, but in tone. It arrived not as a gust, but a breath. Warm, soft, familiar. It brushed across his face like a remembered touch. It smelled of rain-drenched petals and something brighter, something alive. He froze. The snowflakes, dancing through the air, seemed to pause with him. Then he heard it, a distant echo of laughter. Not loud, not near, but real. He turned toward the horizon, heart thudding once, twice, like it hadn't in centuries. Far across the plains of white, the light was changing. The edges of the sky bloomed with soft gold and rose, curling into the clouds like paint dropped in still water. And beneath that warming sky, a figure approached, slowly, steadily, wrapped in flowing light. Liana. She didn't run, she walked with intention, her presence spreading gently across the snow. Where her feet touched tiny shoots of green, peeked through frost. Not enough to melt, but enough to awaken. Oren stepped forward, the wind parting before him. His cloak trailed behind like a shadow, finally letting go. They met in the middle of the courtyard. Neither spoke at first. She looked at him, eyes bright and misted. Her smile trembled not from weakness, but from awe, as though seeing something she hadn't dared hope for. Oren breath held, lifted a hand and touched her cheek. Warm, real. You came back, he said quietly. I told you I would, she whispered. And you waited. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. I wasn't sure the world would let you return. Liana tilted her head. The world isn't always kind to hope, but sometimes it listens. They embraced, not like strangers rediscovering each other, but like something ancient, returning to its rhythm. His arms, once afraid to hold, now wrapped around her, gently but firmly. And she leaned into him, unafraid of the chill, as if it now belonged to her, too. The tree above them shimmered. 3 blossoms became 5. Oren stepped back and led her to it. It's been waiting too. Liana reached out, fingertips grazing the petals. They're beautiful. They're yours. No, she said, looking at him. They're ours. They sat beneath the tree, surrounded by the soft halo of lanterns and snow that no longer fell with softness. She told him of her journey, of the winds that tried to pull her back, of how each season tugged at her, whispering her name. But none louder than the whisper that came from the north. "I wasn't sure I'd find you again," she said. "Not because you were gone, but because I worried the world wouldn't allow this twice." He smiled gently. This wasn't chance. It was return. Liana rested her head on his shoulder. "How did you wait so long?" "I didn't wait," he said. "I remembered." They spoke through the day, though time felt meaningless around them. Birds returned quiet ones, curious. Snow melted in gentle shapes. The castle's walls hummed not with wind, but with stillness wrapped in joy. At dusk, Auron brought her to the Hall of Mirrors. "I cleaned them," he said. "Everyone." She stepped in front of the first. It no longer showed only her. It showed them walking beneath lanterns, laughing near the tree, holding hands in a corridor of stars. "Is this a memory?" she asked. "No," Auron said. "It's a truth." That night, the music chamber sang again. The crystal orbs, long dormant, glowed with songs, both new and ancient. Auron played no instrument. He simply listened. Liana sang not to impress, but to soothe. Her voice carried through the tower like a lullaby written just for Frost. The tree bloomed once more, 6 blossoms, a perfect circle formed beneath its roots where snow met soil. Auron and Liana stood beneath it, hand in hand, looking up. "We're not meant to stay forever, are we?" he asked. "No," she said. "But we are meant to return. And when you go again, I'll leave a wind behind, and I'll meet it." Their breath mingled once more, frost and fire, memory and renewal. And for that night, the seasons stood still, together. The days that followed were quiet, but never empty. Auron and Liana walked the frost-laced halls together, no longer as visitor and host, but as 2 seasons, learning to speak the same language. Their silences were full now, of memory, of understanding, of something deeper than words. They did not speak of forever. They didn't need to. Some things, when felt, truly no longer ask to be named. The castle, once a monument to stillness, began to hum with a low, living warmth. Not the kind that burns, but the kind that holds. Ice no longer threatened to bite. Snowflakes drifted like soft reminders of time passing, but gently, as if asking permission. The waiting tree, now simply called the heart tree, blossomed more often. Not in bursts, but in rhythms. One bloom for every truth spoken beneath it. One petal for every glance that didn't need explanation. Lanterns hung year-round now. Even in the deepest dark, they glowed. In time, Liana would go again. She belonged to movement, to renewal, to life spilling over the edges of itself. Spring could never be captured, only welcomed. And Auron, once a king of loneliness, now understood that love was not a cage, it was a return. So they made a promise, not of permanence, but of presence. She would come back when the world turned. and he would wait, not in sorrow, but in keeping. They marked the days not by a calendar, but by petals. Every visit, every departure, every moment where their souls touched the tree, remembered. Each year she came, sometimes for a month, sometimes for a single night. But always the wind arrived first, carrying her laughter ahead of her footsteps. Oren never missed it. He would feel it in his bones before the wind reached his door. And by the time she crossed the frozen fields, he would already be waiting at the gate, hands bare, heart wide open. The reunions were never loud. They were lantern light and breath, eyes meeting across snow, hands finding each other without hesitation. And when she was gone, he did not mourn. He walked the halls with her memory wrapped around his shoulders like a second cloak. The echoes of her voice lingered in the arches in the music. Orbs in the way the frost settled slower now. The kingdom itself had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. It was no longer the coldest place in the world. It was the warmest place winter had ever known. Travelers began to speak of the castle in hushed awe, of the king who ruled not with fear, but stillness, of a tree that bloomed in ice, of a light that shimmered even when the sun was absent. Some claimed it was magic. Others said it was legend. But those who had stood at the edge of the north, who had felt the wind grow warm when it should not knew otherwise, they knew it was love, not the fiery kind that consumes, but the steady kind that holds. Not a story of conquest, but of return. And so the name of the place changed. No longer the Frozen Keep, no longer the Castle of Silence. It became known as Evermore, a kingdom where frost and bloom danced side by side, where a king, once wrapped in solitude, opened his arms to the wind, where a woman who belonged to spring found a place where her roots could rest, even for a little while. And the people who heard the tale, they didn't remember every detail. They forgot the number of petals, the shape of the hallways, the names of the mirrors. But they remembered this, that even the coldest places can hold warmth, that even silence can become song, that love doesn't need or ever to be real, only return. In the very heart of the castle, beneath the branches of the blooming tree, Oren placed a final lantern. He did not light it. He left it waiting for the next time, for the promise made in a letter long ago when the earth turns toward spring again. Meet me halfway. And when the wind rises now through Evermore, it carries more than snow. It carries her name. It carries his silence. It carries their vow, together always, even when apart. And so the frost never vanished, but it no longer stood alone. The wind still whispered, but now it carried a name. In the quiet heart of Evermore, love never asked to stay forever. It only asked to return. When spring comes again, she'll find him waiting. And until then, beneath a sky of snow and starlight, the lanterns still glow. Thank you for listening. May your night be gentle, your dreams be warm, and your heart always remember, even in winter, love leaves light behind.